Over the past few years, the space industry has become one of the hottest themes for investors. Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, recently achieved a $400 billion valuation in the private markets. FOMO has driven many investors to turn to speculative space startups in hopes of achieving similar gains. Interest in the space theme was so strong that in 2021, Cathie Wood's ARK Invest launched an ETF dedicated solely to investing in space-related companies. Speculative investor hype also creates the opportunity for hucksters and fraudsters to make a quick buck. In 2020, a SPAC called Stable Road Acquisition Corp announced it would be merging with a space technology company called Momentus Space. Momentus claimed to have developed a groundbreaking water plasma thruster, which can be used to move satellites around in outer space. At the time of the SPAC merger, Momentus had no revenue to speak of, but they claimed to be on the verge of massive revenue, and they even had a partnership with SpaceX. In July of 2021, before the merger closed, the SEC charged Momentus, the SPAC, and their CEOs of misleading investors about the company, basically accusing them of fraud. Eventually, the company had to pay millions of dollars to settle the charges. Shockingly, Stable Road's shareholders voted to go through with the merger anyway, even after the company had been accused of fraud. As you probably expected, the company has been a complete disaster. Since the closing of the SPAC, Momentus' stock price has declined by 99.98% and is on the brink of bankruptcy. In this video, we'll look at the bizarre case of Momentus Space, a company that went public even after it had been exposed as a fraud. Momentus Space was founded in California in 2017 by a man named Mikhail Kokorich. Kokorich is a Russian-born physicist and serial entrepreneur. In 2018, Momentus received an investment from the prestigious venture capital firm Y Combinator. Y Combinator described Momentus as a space infrastructure services company. Momentus makes and operates cost-effective and energy-efficient in-space transport and service vehicles that utilize water plasma propulsion technology. Here's how it's supposed to work. A rocket launches a satellite into space. Along with the satellite, the rocket will also carry Momentus' transfer vehicle, also referred to as a satellite bus. The Momentus satellite bus delivers the satellites to their desired orbit. Kokorich had invented a new water plasma propulsion system. This uses microwave electrothermal technology. The Momentus satellite bus would use this new propulsion system to move around in outer space. This new system was supposedly far better and more cost-effective than previous methods. In October of 2021, a SPAC called Stable Road Acquisition Corp agreed to merge with Momentus at a valuation of $1.2 billion. This chart shows Stable Road's stock price. Before a merger target is announced, the SPAC is basically just a shell company holding $10 per share in cash. In October of 2020, they announced their intention to merge with Momentus Space. The announcement was well received by investors. In February of 2021, the SPAC's share price reached $26. This was before the merger had yet closed. So why were investors so excited to invest in Momentus Space? Despite the company only being a few years old, they claim to have made very rapid progress. In 2019, they conducted a successful test flight which validated their technology. This was called the El Camino test flight. They signed a number of contracts with government and commercial customers. In 2020, they signed a contract with SpaceX. Momentus satellite buses would be included in SpaceX satellite launches. The company's ambitions extended far beyond just satellite launches. They plan to eventually use their space vehicles to mine rare metals on asteroids. Like all SPACs, Momentus provided extremely optimistic financial projections. In 2020, they generated basically zero revenue, but by 2024, they expected to have more than $1 billion of revenue and $600 million of free cash flow. I mean, who wouldn't want to invest in this company? Their technology has already been proven to work in a test flight, and they've lined up a massive contract with SpaceX. In July of 2021, before the merger closed, the SEC filed charges against Stable Road Acquisition Company, Momentus, the CEO of the SPAC, and Momentus founder Mikhail Kokorich. In July of 2019, Momentus conducted a test. This was the so-called El Camino test. It launched its thruster device into space on a satellite. The launch was conducted by a third-party launch provider. Prior to the satellite launch, in an internal slide presentation, Momentus partly defined mission success as 100 individual burns of 1 minute or more. According to the SEC, the test was a failure. After experiencing significant problems with supporting subsystems in its propulsion system, Momentus attempted only 23 firings, and data suggests that only 3 hot firings produced plasma. None of these firings lasted a full minute or generated measurable thrust. Momentus lost contact with the satellite approximately 3 months into the planned 6-month mission, and was never able to attempt the remaining 77 firings it had planned, much less achieve any of the 100 individual burns of 1 minute or more. Thus, Momentus failed to meet its own criteria for mission success, as set forth in its internal slide presentation. Moreover, the thrusters they tested were subscale and not powerful enough to be used commercially. The 3 thrusters that did fire failed to provide any measurable or detectable changes to the test satellite's orbital velocity. In internal emails, Momentus engineers acknowledged that the El Camino test failed to obtain any useful mission results. The company set up a failure review board to study why the mission failed. Instead of admitting to the failure, Kokorich misled the public and investors about the test. In September of 2019, he spoke to the publication Space News. He told them, quote, "The on-orbit testing has demonstrated for the first time that microwave electrothermal plasma technology has the potential to achieve high specific impulse using water propellant. Water plasma propulsion is now technologically mature enough to be baseline for operational in-space transportation missions. The purpose of the El Camino Real mission was to flight demonstrate our core propulsion technology, so customers, investors, and stakeholders can have absolute confidence that Momentus will deliver their payloads to a given orbit," unquote. The SEC alleges that this statement was false for 2 reasons. Firstly, the test failed. Secondly, even if the test worked, the thrusters were too small to deliver payloads to a given orbit. Besides the alleged failure of the test, there was another problem. Mikhail Kokorich is a Russian citizen. The US Commerce Department considers certain technologies to be vital to national security. This mostly applies to defense technologies, but also applies to space-related technologies, as they can often have defense applications. Foreign citizens are not allowed to access restricted US technologies unless they receive an export license from the Commerce Department. So why do these restrictions exist? The US government doesn't want foreign agents to start working at NASA or high-tech defense contractors. There's a risk that they could steal sensitive technology and bring it back to their home country, where it can be used to make weapons. The biggest countries that the US fears in this regard are Russia and China. This created a kind of bizarre situation for Kokorich. He founded Momentus Space in California. During the relevant period, he lived in the United States, but he's a Russian citizen. So Kokorich technically needed an export control license to work at his own company with the technology he himself developed. In 2017, Kokorich applied for an export control license. The State Department denied the request on national security grounds. Basically, they don't trust him. Kokorich initially came to the US on a work visa. In June of 2018, the US Customs and Immigration Services revoked his work visa, so Kokorich applied for political asylum in the US. He claimed that he was a vocal critic of the Putin government and thus risked persecution if he returned to Russia. In 2019, his asylum application was denied. US immigration authorities said they found inconsistencies in Kokorich's application with regard to his political affiliation and activities in Russia. In other words, they didn't believe he was actually being persecuted by the Russian government. Shortly thereafter, the FBI raided Momentus's headquarters. They were investigating whether Kokorich was improperly transferring sensitive technology abroad. Kokorich was briefly detained but soon released. Did Kokorich have any intention of taking his water plasma technology back to Russia? I have no idea. Moreover, Russia probably wouldn't even be interested in this technology, seeing as it doesn't work. You can debate the morality of whether it's reasonable for the US government to restrict Kokorich from working at his own company just because he's Russian. But the fact of the matter is, Kokorich's legal status was of material concern to Momentus's investors. In the SPAC presentation, they described him as a visionary founder with 20 years of experience. Losing him as CEO would presumably be a big setback for the company. Moreover, to conduct a commercial satellite launch, you need to get approval from the FAA. The FAA can deny launch licenses for national security reasons. Given Kokorich's immigration and legal issues, there is a very significant risk that Momentus would fail to gain FAA approval. In June of 2020, Kokorich met with Brian Cabot, the CEO of Stable Road Acquisition Company. That's the SPAC. They began negotiations for Momentus to merge with the SPAC. Kokorich told Cabot that the 2019 El Camino test was a big success. Kokorich also told Cabot about his political asylum application. Kokorich said he was confident that his asylum application would be approved. Once he gets asylum, all of the legal and national security issues will go away. In reality, by this point, Kokorich's asylum application had been rejected, and there were ongoing legal proceedings to deport him. Based on the false information provided by Kokorich, Stable Road Acquisition Company agreed to merge with Momentus in October of 2020. Momentus planned to conduct its first commercial flight in January of 2021. This was after the SPAC merger was announced, but before it closed. The FAA did not allow Momentus to participate in the launch, citing the national security concerns related to Kokorich. Shortly thereafter, Kokorich resigned as CEO and agreed to divest his entire stake in the company. That's the only way they could get FAA approval. Thus, Momentus lost its visionary founder. Following Kokorich's resignation, they hired a man named John Rood to be the new CEO. Rood was previously an executive at the defense giant Lockheed Martin and served as an undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Defense. In July of 2021, the SEC filed charges against Stable Road Acquisition Company, its CEO Brian Cabot, Momentus, and Mikhail Kokorich. Stable Road and Cabot didn't know about the fraud. In a way, they were victims too, as they were deceived by Kokorich. However, they did almost no due diligence. Kokorich told them that the El Camino test launch was a success. They just took his word for it. They didn't bother to independently verify this or demand to see the raw data. The SEC alleges that Stable Road misled its investors by representing that they had done extensive due diligence when in reality they had done almost none. Stable Road paid a $1 million fine and also agreed to forfeit the free founder shares it would have been awarded for organizing the SPAC. Brian Cabot paid a $40,000 fine. Momentus paid a $7 million fine, and Kokorich paid a $2 million fine. The terms of the settlement did not require Momentus or Kokorich to admit any wrongdoing. The SEC filed the charges against Momentus on July 13, 2021. By this time, the merger had not yet closed. Stable Road's stock price was about $12. Following the charges, the share price fell down to about $10. The price of a SPAC almost never falls below $10 before the merger is completed. Remember that before the merger is completed, a SPAC is just a shell company holding $10 per share of cash. Immediately prior to the merger, shareholders of the SPAC have the option to redeem their shares and get their $10 back. No matter how bad the proposed merger target is, the SPAC should never trade below $10 because you always have the option to redeem your shares. Once the merger target is announced, the SPAC shareholders also need to approve the merger by a vote. Shockingly, despite knowing about the fraud charges, Stable Road's shareholders voted to go through with the SPAC anyway. The merger officially closed on August 12, 2021. So why did shareholders still vote for the deal? Following the revelation of the fraud, the terms of the merger were revised. The original terms valued Momentus at $1.2 billion. Following the fraud allegations, the terms were changed. The revised terms cut Momentus' valuation to approximately $600 million. The lower valuation means that the SPAC shareholders will own a larger percentage of Momentus. The company still claimed that its technology worked, but they acknowledged the fact that their 2019 El Camino test was a failure. This pushed back their timelines for development and commercialization. They provided new revenue projections. In the original projections, they expected to generate $1.2 billion of revenue in 2024 and $4 billion in 2027. In the revised projections, they only expected to make $400 million of revenue in 2024 and $2.2 billion in 2027. The revenue projections were cut in half, but the valuation was also cut in half. So perhaps the SPAC shareholders thought they were still getting a fair deal. Unfortunately, Momentus' technology is not commercially viable, and the company has failed to ever generate meaningful revenue. This black line shows Momentus' actual reported revenue to date. It's basically nothing. To date, Momentus' stock price has fallen 99.98%. The company was forced to conduct multiple reverse stock splits to keep its share price above $1. The company is a complete failure and is on the brink of bankruptcy. While Kokorich agreed to pay a $2 million fine to settle the charges against him, he has never admitted to any wrongdoing. In 2022, he spoke to the publication Quartz, where he gave his side of the story. He addressed the issue of the 2019 El Camino test flight. Quote, "The test of the entire propulsion system was successful. We demonstrated that thrusters had hot fires, which meant that propulsion as the whole worked properly. If any of the propulsion system elements failed, we wouldn't be able to fire propulsion. Momentus created a failure review board to investigate a failure of the avionics on the satellite bus. As a result of the review board, the technical team decided to build robust and fault-tolerant avionics in-house. So by the time we filed the S4, we didn't have in our technology roadmap the avionics that failed during the first test mission." Unquote. The goal of the test was to fire the thrusters 100 times for at least 1 minute each. They were only able to fire the thrusters 3 times. None of them lasted for 1 minute, nor did they generate any measurable thrust. Kokorich is saying that the fact that they were able to fire the thrusters at all means that the system as a whole works. The only problem was the avionics. Basically, the computer that controls the thrusters. Because the avionics were not part of the technology roadmap at the time, they didn't have to disclose this issue. Even if Kokorich's explanation is true, it would be absurd to call the test successful. Imagine hypothetically that you're trying to build an airplane that can fly from New York to LA. You intend to eventually fly passenger service from New York to LA, so you do a test flight. After 10 miles, the avionics fail and the plane crashes. But you say, this test was actually a complete success because the engines were able to turn on. Not only is Kokorich's logic absurd, but what he's saying probably isn't even true. Momentus eventually disclosed more information about the failed test in a regulatory filing. They said there was a pump issue which significantly restricted flow of water into the thruster during 9 of the 12 hot firings, preventing plasma generation. The 3 hot firings that did have water present were found to have produced plasma. The test failed because of a faulty pump, nothing to do with the avionics. In the 3 times that the pump worked, the thruster indeed produced plasma. But even in these 3 instances, it failed to generate any measurable thrust. Imagine you make an airplane. You test the engine. The engine moves a little bit and then sputters out. It does not provide enough power to lift off. You say your flight test was a complete success because the engine moved a little bit. In that same interview with courts, Kokorich also talks about his legal and immigration issues in the US. Quote, "I came to the US as an entrepreneur and technologist. I built companies using my hard work, entrepreneurial talent, and technical acumen. I created hundreds of engineering jobs, invented a lot of technologies. My companies made and launched dozens of satellites. Unfortunately, I could not convince the US government that I am a sincere and honest entrepreneur who could become the next Sikorsky for the US aerospace industry." Unquote. The next Sikorsky. Who is Sikorsky? Igor Sikorsky was born in what is now Ukraine, but was at the time part of the Russian Empire in 1889. Following the Bolshevik Revolution, he fled Russia and eventually moved to the US in 1919. In the US, he founded the Sikorsky Aircraft Company. The Sikorsky Aircraft Company was a pioneer in the development of helicopters. Sikorsky was eventually acquired by Lockheed Martin. To this day, it is one of the largest producers of both civilian and military helicopters in the world. There's a big difference between Igor Sikorsky and Mikhail Kokorich. Sikorsky's helicopters actually worked. Kokorich's water plasma thrusters failed. After stepping down from Momentus, Kokorich moved to Switzerland. He founded a new company called Destinus, which is trying to develop a hydrogen-powered airplane. Kokorich complains bitterly about his treatment by the US government. The fact that they forced him to step down from his own company and divest his equity stake. In 2021, Momentus bought back Kokorich's shares for $40 million. Kokorich should be thanking the State Department. Had they allowed him to keep his shares, they'd now be worth almost nothing. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about Momentus Space? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.